The ashes of hatred. The war had ended in banners and speeches. It had ended in parades that marched down streets still smelling faintly of smoke. It had ended in treaties signed beneath vaulted ceilings of white marble, where human diplomats stood shoulder to shoulder with towering dragonkin envoys whose scales shimmered like living armor beneath chandelier light. It had ended for everyone except Sergeant Cale Arden. For Cale, the war lingered in the quiet. It lived in the empty space beside his cot where his rifle once rested within arm's reach. It lived in the way he counted exits in every room. It lived in the phantom ache of a leg that was no longer flesh and in the flicker of the prosthetic eye that hummed softly whenever lightning stirred beyond the hills. Most of all, it lived in the sky. He did not trust clear skies. Clear skies had once split open and rained fire. Redfall was the kind of settlement built by stubborn people. It crouched along the frontier where the old forests met the scarred wastelands left behind by orbital bombardment. The earth beyond the ridge still bore glassy patches where alien plasma had fused soil into crystal. On certain mornings, when the sun struck those fields just right, they gleamed like frozen lakes. Some called it beautiful. Cale called it a graveyard. His cabin stood beyond the settlement proper, near the edge of the charred hills. He had chosen isolation deliberately. The townsfolk appreciated him from a distance, respected the uniform he no longer wore, but proximity made them uneasy. Children stared too long at his leg, at the faint seam along his skull where metal met bone, at the dull glow of his artificial eye. They whispered stories. Half of them thought he had died and come back wrong. Some days Cale wondered if they were correct. The Dragonkin were no longer enemies. Officially, the war, later called the Ashfall conflict in textbooks, had ended 5 years prior when humanity discovered the truth behind the invasion. The Dragonkin had not come as conquerors. They had come fleeing extinction. An empire older than Earth had fractured under the weight of a civil war that split their species in two. The Dominion, who believed lesser species should be ruled and reshaped, and the Conquered, who believed coexistence was survival. Earth had been caught in the middle. By the time diplomacy pierced the fog of misunderstanding, cities had burned on both sides. The Dominion faction had been driven back into deep space. The Conquered remained, seeking alliance. Humanity had agreed. Peace had been forged. Cultural exchanges began, joint councils formed. Dragonkin architects helped rebuild shattered infrastructure. Their biotechnology accelerated human medicine by decades. Most humans adapted. Cale did not. Because peace did not erase memory. He remembered the first time he had seen a Dragonkin warform descend through cloud cover. It had been vast, wings spanning the sky, scales like molten iron. Its roar had shaken windows miles away. Fire had poured from its jaws, not wild and chaotic, but precise, targeting military installations with terrifying efficiency. He remembered how beautiful it had looked. He remembered how many died beneath it. No speech about misunderstanding could burn that image away. The day the sky cracked again, Cale was splitting wood. It was a mundane task, and he preferred it that way. The rhythm of the axe biting into grain gave his mind something to focus on. The artificial servos in his leg adjusted with each stance shift, humming faintly. He had long since stopped noticing the sound. The air was crisp with early autumn. Leaves skittered along the ground in dry spirals. Redfall's rooftops glinted in the distance. The first tremor was subtle. A vibration beneath his boots. Cale paused mid-swing. Another tremor followed, stronger. Birds burst from treetops in a chaotic flurry. He dropped the axe. The sky split. Not as it had during the invasion, no armada blotting out the sun, but with a streak of fire cutting across the blue like a falling star. Too small for a dreadship. Too erratic for controlled descent. His breath slowed automatically. Impact trajectory, Western Ridge. Distance 3 kilometers. Time to crash, seconds. The streak vanished behind the hills. A muffled explosion followed, carried on the wind. Silence swallowed the world. Cale stood still for 3 heartbeats. Then the soldier took over. Inside the cabin, the old pulse rifle still hung above the hearth. He hadn't fired it in years, but he cleaned it weekly. Habit, insurance. He grabbed it now, checked the charge cell, and stepped into the open. Redfall's alarm bell did not ring. No sirens. No scramble. Either the settlement hadn't seen the fall, or they assumed it was debris from an orbital transport. Kale did not assume. He moved. The western ridge was a scarred stretch of terrain where alien bombardment had once torn the Earth apart. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground like broken teeth. Patches of fused glass crunched beneath his boots. As he crested the final rise, smoke curled into the sky ahead. The crater was small compared to wartime impacts, perhaps 20 meters across. The Earth around it still glowed faintly from residual heat. At its center lay something curved and metallic. Not metal exactly. Dragonkin vessels were grown, not forged, organic alloys fused with living tissue. The structure before him resembled a seed split open, its shell peeled back by violent entry. An escape pod. Kale's jaw tightened. Why here? Why alone? He descended carefully, rifle raised. The pod hissed softly, vents releasing steam. Inside, amid torn cushioning and cracked bioshell. Movement. Small. He adjusted his aim. 3 shapes shifted in the dim interior. Then one lifted its head. And Kale felt the world tilt. They were not soldiers. Not towering dragon forms armored for war. They were hatchlings. No larger than large dogs, their limbs awkward, wings folded too tightly against fragile bodies. Their scales shimmered faintly, one crimson as fresh blood, one deep sapphire like twilight, one pale gold that seemed to catch even the faintest light. They stared at him. The red one moved first. It hissed weakly, placing itself between him and the others. Smoke puffed from its nostrils, not a blast, just a reflex. The blue one trembled, one wing bent at an unnatural angle. The gold one let out a thin, high-pitched whimper. Kale's finger rested on the trigger. He had killed Dragonkin before. He had watched them fall from the sky trailing smoke and flame. He had felt nothing then but grim determination. Now his hands felt heavy. They were children. Alien children. He could end them now. The war had stolen his brother in the second wave of orbital strikes. It had taken his squad in a canyon ambush when Dominion forces unleashed a ground assault of armored warforms. Kale had survived because he had been thrown clear by the blast that shredded his leg. He had crawled through blood and ash while dragons roared overhead. He had sworn never to forget. The gold hatchling whimpered again. The sound cracked something inside him. Not because it was loud. Because it was small. The blue one stumbled forward suddenly, claws scraping against the broken pod interior. It lost balance and tumbled down the short slope of the crater toward him. Kale did not move. The hatchling collapsed at his boot. Its scales were cracked in places from impact, a thin line of dark blood traced along its side. Its breathing was shallow. It lifted its head slowly. Their eyes met. Its pupils were slit like a reptile's, but wide with something unmistakable. Fear, not hatred, not aggression. Fear. Then, hesitantly, it pressed its head against the cold metal of his prosthetic leg. Kale inhaled sharply. The contact was warm. Alive. Trusting. The red hatchling shifted uncertainly, as if ready to intervene despite its weakness. The gold one inched closer behind it, peeking around its sibling's shoulder. Kale's grip tightened. He could step back. He could let nature claim them. The wilderness would not spare fragile creatures unused to it. No one would know he had been here. The blue hatchling shuddered faintly against his leg. A memory surfaced unbidden. A village on the outskirts of New Marseille during the third year of war. Refugees huddled beneath collapsed buildings while artillery screamed overhead. A human child had clung to Kale's armored thigh, eyes wide, trusting that the soldier in front of him meant safety. Kale had carried that child through fire. He had not asked if it was convenient. He had not asked if it was wise. He had simply acted. Damn it, he muttered now. The rifle lowered an inch. Then another. The red hatchling's hiss softened. Kale slung the rifle over his shoulder in one sharp motion. This is tactical, he told himself harshly. Information, leverage. But even in his own mind, the words rang hollow. He stepped forward and reached down. The blue hatchling flinched at first, but did not bite. It allowed him to lift it carefully. It was lighter than he expected. Warmth radiated through his coat instantly, as though he were holding a furnace wrapped in silk. He set it gently outside the crater before returning for the others. The red one resisted more strongly, trying to stand protectively despite trembling limbs. It gave him a defiant look that would have been intimidating if it weren't so small. "You're in no condition to posture," Kale murmured. Carefully, he wrapped it in his heavy field cloak. The gold hatchling made a soft trilling noise as he lifted it. Its claws caught briefly in the fabric of his sleeve, not to scratch but to cling. Within minutes, he stood at the crater's edge with 3 bundled dragon hatchlings shifting against his chest. He glanced back at the shattered pod. No distress beacon that he could detect. No approaching aircraft. Just wind whispering through broken stone. If Redfall patrols found them first. He did not want to imagine it. Humanity had forgiven. But frontier towns remembered differently. He began the trek back. Carrying dragons was an exercise in controlled chaos. They shifted constantly, adjusting wings and tails. Heat seeped through layers of fabric. The gold one tucked its head beneath his chin briefly, exhaling warm breath against his collarbone. Kale's jaw clenched. This was temporary. He would contact authorities. The conquered embassy would retrieve them. He was not becoming a caretaker. He was containing a situation. The blue hatchling stirred weakly, pressing closer. His stride slowed slightly to compensate. By the time Redfall's rooftops appeared through the trees, dusk had begun its descent. Orange light stretched long shadows across the ground. Kale avoided the main road, circling toward his isolated cabin. No one saw him enter. Inside, he kicked the door shut and slid the bolt into place. The cabin felt smaller suddenly. He cleared space near the hearth and laid the hatchlings down gently. They immediately gravitated toward the warmth of the fire. The red one curled around the other 2 instinctively, even in exhaustion. Kale stood over them, breathing hard. This was madness. He crouched reluctantly and examined them more closely. Surface burns along the blue one's wing, minor fractures along the red one's hind leg. The gold one seemed least injured but dehydrated. No obvious implants. No visible tracking nodes. He ran a handheld scanner across their scales. Biometric readings spiked, elevated stress but stable. "They sent children alone," he muttered. "Why?" The red hatchling's eyes opened slowly. It watched him. Not with fear now. With cautious curiosity. The gold one shifted and, after a moment's hesitation, toddled forward. It approached his metal leg again. Kale tensed. The hatchling paused inches away. Then gently pressed its head against the prosthetic. Warmth seeped through steel. A soft rumbling sound vibrated faintly. A purr. Kale froze. He had faced warforms 3 stories tall without flinching. But this small, vulnerable gesture, unsettled him. "I am not your guardian," he said roughly. The hatchling purred louder. The sound reverberated through the metal and into his bones. Something inside his chest tightened painfully. He turned abruptly and began rummaging through old supply crates, field bandages, nutrient gel packs, hydration injectors. He worked with brisk efficiency, applying salves and setting minor fractures with makeshift splints. The blue hatchling flinched once but did not resist. The red watched every movement, protective even in weakness. The gold leaned into his touch without hesitation. Trust, unquestioned, unearned. Kale finished binding the last wing and sat back on his heels. The 3 hatchlings curled together near the fire, small bodies rising and falling in synchronized rhythm. The cabin was quiet except for crackling wood and faint, contented trills. For years, silence had been oppressive. Tonight it felt different. Though, Kale leaned against the wall and closed his eye briefly. He had not planned for this. He did not want this. But as the gold hatchling shifted in its sleep and pressed closer to his metal leg, he did not move away. Outside, the wind swept across Redfall's rooftops. Inside, 3 alien children slept beneath the watch of a broken soldier who had once sworn never to spare their kind. And for the first time since the war ended, the hatred inside him did not feel quite as solid as it once had. Embers in the quiet. Kale Arden did not sleep that night. He sat in the wooden chair beside the hearth, rifle resting across his lap out of habit rather than intention. The fire burned low, casting long amber shadows that flickered over rough timber walls, and the three small shapes curled together on a folded blanket near the warmth. He had faced artillery barrages with steadier nerves. This felt more dangerous. The red hatchling stirred first sometime after midnight. It lifted its narrow head slowly, eyes adjusting to the dimness. For a moment it did not move, simply watching him. Kale held its gaze. There was intelligence there. Not the calculating chill he remembered from Dominion warforms, but something alert and cautious, protective. It shifted, testing its injured hind leg, the splint held. The blue hatchling made a soft whimper in its sleep, wing twitching. The gold one pressed closer to it instinctively. The red hatchling looked back at Kale again. He exhaled slowly, go back to sleep. It didn't understand his words, but perhaps it understood tone. After a moment, it lowered its head again. Kale leaned back in the chair. He had told himself this was temporary. At dawn, he would contact the conquered liaison in the capital. The dragonkin would retrieve their young. The situation would end. Clean. Controlled. Yet something in him resisted the thought with unexpected sharpness. He did not examine that feeling too closely. Morning came pale and cold. Frost traced delicate patterns across the cabin windows. The fire had dwindled to embers. Kale rose stiffly, joints protesting, and added fresh logs. The hatchlings reacted immediately to the crackle of renewed flame. The gold one sat upright first, blinking wide eyes. It made a questioning trill. Then it saw him. Its entire body seemed to brighten. It pushed itself up on unsteady legs and toddled forward, tail dragging slightly behind it. Kale braced himself. The hatchling stopped inches from him and tilted its head, studying his face. He became acutely aware of the scars crossing his cheek, of the faint mechanical hum behind his artificial eye. The gold hatchling extended a claw carefully and tapped the metal seam near his temple. Kale stiffened. The claw was warm, gentle. Not probing for weakness. Curious. The red hatchling rose next, moving more slowly but positioning itself subtly between Kale and its siblings. The blue struggled upright with visible effort. Kale crouched, assessing. "You'll need food," he muttered. Dragonkin dietary requirements during wartime had been classified, but post-war medical journals had become public. He recalled reading about their high metabolic rate, their reliance on protein-rich sustenance, their ability to metabolize certain metals and minerals in trace amounts. He rummaged through his supplies and found dried meat strips meant for his own rations. He hesitated only a second before tearing one into smaller pieces and placing them cautiously on the floor. The blue hatchling sniffed first, then snapped up a piece with surprising speed. The gold followed eagerly. The red waited, watching Kale carefully, before finally lowering its head to eat. He almost smiled. Paranoid, he murmured, "Smart." They devoured the offering quickly. The gold hatchling looked up expectantly when the last piece vanished. Kale sighed and offered more. He told himself it was simply efficient care. Nothing more. By mid-morning, Redfall was awake beyond the cabin walls. Kale could hear distant hammering, the low rumble of transport vehicles, voices carried faintly on the wind. He stepped outside briefly, scanning the horizon. No conquered ships. No patrol drones overhead. The crash had either gone unnoticed or unreported. That would not last. He returned inside to find the blue hatchling attempting to stretch its injured wing. It winced, emitting a sharp chirp. Kale knelt carefully as he adjusted the splint with steady hands. The hatchling froze but did not resist. The gold one hovered anxiously nearby, nudging its sibling's shoulder. The red watched, eyes narrowed in concentration. "You protect each other," Kale said quietly. He had seen soldiers do the same. Something tight coiled in his chest again. The first complication came just before noon. A knock sounded at the cabin door. 3 firm raps. Kale went still. The hatchlings froze as well, reacting instantly to the tension in his posture. Another knock. Arden called a familiar voice, "You in there?" Merk Holt, Redfall's head of security. Former infantry. One of the few men in town who did not treat Kale like fragile glass. Kale glanced at the hatchlings. The gold one had already scurried toward his leg again. Stay, he whispered. He rose and stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Merrick stood on the porch, broad-shouldered and weathered. His eyes flicked briefly toward the hills beyond. You see it? Merrick asked. I saw something, Kale replied evenly. Impact on the western ridge. Patrol found debris this morning, not human. Kale's expression did not change. Dragonkin. Looks like it, Merrick studied him carefully. Town council's nervous. They always are. Merrick gave a short huff of humor, then his face sobered. We've got history, Kale. Folks remember the ashfall, even if the capital says we're friends now. I remember, Kale said quietly. Merrick nodded once. We're sweeping the area again at dusk, if you saw anything unusual. I didn't. It was the first lie he had told since the war. It felt heavier than expected. Merrick held his gaze a second longer. Then nodded, all right, just be careful. As Merrick walked back toward town, Kale felt sweat cooling at the base of his neck. He had crossed a line. Not for strategy. Not for leverage. For them. He stepped back inside. The gold hatchling was waiting at the door. It looked up at him as if confirming he had returned. Kale swallowed. This complicates things, he muttered. The red hatchling tilted its head. Afternoon light spilled through the windows in slanted beams. The hatchlings had grown bolder. The gold one explored constantly, sniffing corners and testing furniture legs with curious nudges. The blue followed more cautiously, movement still limited by injury. The red maintained a watchful position near the center of the room, always aware of where Kale stood. At one point, the gold hatchling discovered his prosthetic leg again and began nudging the metal joint curiously. Kale shifted slightly. It pawed at the mechanism, then gently placed its ear against it as if listening. The faint hum of servos vibrated beneath its scales. The hatchling's eyes widened. Then it did something entirely unexpected. It mirrored the hums. A soft, resonant vibration emanated from its chest, matching the mechanical frequency almost perfectly. Kale blinked. The sound blended strangely with the prosthetic's low whir, creating an oddly harmonious tone. The blue hatchling looked up, intrigued. The red took a cautious step closer. The gold repeated the sound, slightly louder this time. It was experimenting. Communicating. Kale felt a slow exhale leave his lungs. You're not weapons, he murmured. The word surprised him. During the war, Dragonkin had been synonymous with destruction. Now 3 fragile creatures were harmonizing with the hum of his damaged body. Something in his long-held narrative fractured quietly. That evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds swallowed the horizon, thunder cracked across the hills. Kale secured the shutters as wind began to howl. Inside, the hatchlings reacted strongly to the storm. The blue one trembled visibly at the first thunderclap. The gold darted toward Kale instinctively. The red bristled, wings flaring slightly despite injury. Another thunderous boom rattled the cabin. The blue let out a sharp cry. Without thinking, Kale dropped to one knee and gathered it carefully into his arms. It resisted for half a second, then melted against his chest. Heat flooded through him. The gold pressed against his side. The red hesitated only briefly before joining them, forming a tight cluster against his torso. Kale sat back against the wall, holding all 3 awkwardly. I've got you, he muttered, unsure whether he meant the words. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the roof. Inside, the hatchlings clung to him. The blue's trembling eased gradually. The gold purring resumed steady and grounding. Even the red's rigid posture softened slightly. Kale stared at the far wall, heart beating steadily. He had once cursed their kind beneath storms like this, remembering how dragonkin wings had blotted out lightning flashes. Now he shielded 3 of them from thunder. The irony was almost unbearable. And yet, it did not feel wrong. Late into the night after the storm began to fade, Kale spoke softly into the quiet. I lost my brother to your kind. The hatchlings did not understand the words. But they listened. He was younger than me, thought he was invincible. His jaw tightened. Dominion's strike burned through his unit before reinforcements arrived. The gold lifted its head slightly. Kale stared at the dying embers. I hated you, all of you. The red's eyes remained fixed on his face. I still don't know what to do with this. The blue shifted, pressing closer. He closed his eye briefly. For years, anger had been simpler than grief. Now these small lives forced him to confront something more complicated. They were not dominions. They were not warforms. They were children caught in currents beyond their choosing. Much like human civilians had been. The thought unsettled him deeply. Morning brought consequences. A transport drone passed low overhead. Kale watched from the doorway, tension tightening his shoulders. Redfall patrols were increasing. Merrick's suspicion lingered in the back of his mind. He could not hide the hatchlings forever. The rational course remained clear: contact the conquered embassy. Arrange retrieval. Let professionals handle it. He turned back inside. The hatchlings were playing. The gold chased its own tail in a clumsy circle. The blue attempted a short hop, wings fluttering unevenly. The red supervised from a slightly elevated crate, as though ensuring no one injured themselves. A soft huff escaped Kale before he could stop it. It might have been a laugh. The gold immediately perked up and bounded toward him. He caught it reflexively. It nestled under his chin with complete trust. Trust. He had not earned it. He did not deserve it. But it was given freely. The door rattled suddenly. A louder knock this time. Arden Merrick's voice again, more urgent. Kale's blood ran cold. The hatchlings froze. He set the gold down gently. Quiet, he whispered. The red seemed to understand instinctively, herding the others toward the back corner near stacked crates. Kale stepped outside once more. Merrick's expression was grim. Scouts found tracks near the ridge, he said. Small, not warform, could be juveniles. Kale kept his breathing steady. And Council voted, if we find them first, we contain the threat. Contain. Kale knew what that meant. Merrick studied him carefully. You sure you haven't seen anything? The pause stretched. Kale felt the weight of 3 fragile lives behind his cabin wall. He thought of his brother. Of burning cities. Of storms. He met Merrick's gaze. I haven't seen anything, he said. The lie came easier this time. Merrick nodded slowly. We sweep again tonight. As he left, Kale stood motionless for a long time. Then he turned back inside. The red hatchling was watching him from the shadows. It stepped forward cautiously. The gold followed. The blue limped after them. Kale crouched in front of them. They'll kill you, he said quietly. The gold nudged his hand. The blue lined into his knee. The red held his gaze steadily. He exhaled. For the first time since the crash, a decision began to take shape, not born of impulse but of choice. He could surrender them. Or he could protect them. Hatred had defined him for years. But hatred had not brought his brother back. It had not healed the ache in his chest. It had only hollowed him. The gold hatchling climbed awkwardly into his lap. The blue rested its head against his metal leg. The red settled close enough to touch. Kale wrapped his arms around them slowly. I don't know what this makes me, he murmured. Outside, Redfall prepared to hunt. Inside, a broken soldier chose, for the first time since the war, to protect rather than destroy. The embers of his hatred dimmed slightly. And in their place, something fragile but undeniable began to glow. When fire learned mercy, the decision did not arrive like thunder. It settled quietly. Like snow, Kale Arden had always believed choices were made in bursts, under gunfire, beneath collapsing skis, in the split second between survival and death. But this one came in stillness. 3 dragon hatchlings slept in a heap beside his hearth, their small bodies rising and falling in unison. The gold one's tail twitched faintly. The blue's injured wings shifted as it dreamed. The red rested with its head lifted slightly, even in sleep, as though standing watch. Outside, Redfall prepared to hunt them. Inside, Kale prepared to defy the town he had once bled for. He did not delude himself. If Merrick found them here, it would not end in diplomacy. Frontier fear ran deeper than capital treaties. Old graves did not empty easily. He stood slowly and crossed to the window. The hills beyond his cabin rolled into shadow as dusk began to fall. Lanterns flickered to life in town. He could already imagine patrol units fanning outward, boots crunching through frost-hardened soil. He had hours at most. Kale turned back to the hatchlings. They trusted him. That was the unbearable part. They did not know his history. They did not see the burning cities in his memories. They did not know how many of their kind he had shot from the sky. They only knew warmth, food, safety. He crouched beside them. The red opened one eye immediately. Sharp, aware. You're smarter than you look, Kale murmured. The red's gaze softened slightly. The gold stirred and rolled onto its back briefly, claws flexing. The blue pressed closer to its siblings. Kale exhaled slowly. We're leaving. The preparation was methodical. Soldiers survived because they planned 3 moves ahead. Kale gathered what he would need: field rations, water canisters, spare ammunition, though he hoped not to use it, thermal blankets, a compact medkit. He avoided anything that would slow them down. The nearest conquered outpost lay beyond the eastern ravines, 2 days on foot for a healthy adult. Longer with injured hatchlings. Shorter if he cut through the old bombardment zone. More dangerous. He chose the shorter path. When he returned to the hearth, the hatchlings were fully awake. They watched him with unblinking attention. The gold trotted forward first, tail swaying. Kale knelt and gently wrapped each in insulated cloth, fashioning makeshift carriers he could secure across his chest and back. The blue winced when lifted but did not resist. The red endured the process with stoic stillness. The gold chirped softly, unbothered. By the time he stood, he carried warmth on both sides of his body. He paused at the door. The cabin had been his fortress. His isolation. He extinguished the hearth carefully. Then stepped into the cold. They had gone less than half a kilometer when he heard the distant crackle of radio chatter. Patrol sweep. Earlier than expected. Kale altered course immediately, angling toward a line of dense brush that led into the shattered lowlands. The gold hatchling shifted against his chest, but remained quiet. The red's head lifted slightly, scanning. Good instincts, he thought grimly. A beam of white light cut through the trees behind him. Movement near the ridge, a voice called faintly. They had found tracks. Kale increased his pace. His prosthetic leg adjusted automatically, servos compensating for uneven terrain. Branches scraped against his coat, frost cracked beneath boots. Another shout carried through the dark. Closer. He reached the edge of the bombardment zone just as a flare ignited behind him, casting the forest in harsh red. The land ahead was a graveyard of stone and glass. Crystalline fields stretched outward like frozen waves. Jagged metal skeletons of long-destroyed vehicles lay half-buried in fused earth. It was dangerous terrain, but patrols avoided it at night. Kale stepped onto the glassy surface. The ground sang faintly underfoot, a strange harmonic vibration as wind moved across hardened crystal. The gold hatchling lifted its head at the sound. It emitted a low hum in response. The vibration deepened. The red hissed softly, not in fear, but in warning. Kale froze. The crystalline field brightened faintly beneath them. Resonance. Dragonkin biology interacting with residual plasma glass. He moved carefully, reducing pressure. The glow dimmed. Behind him, patrol lights hesitated at the edge of the zone. Forget it, someone muttered distantly, nothing survives out there. Kale allowed himself one breath of relief. Then continued. The night grew colder. Wind cut across the open wasteland mercilessly. The blue hatchling began to shiver despite its natural heat. Kale stopped beside the skeletal remains of an overturned transport and crouched within its shelter. He adjusted the blue's splint gently. It'll hold, he murmured. The gold nudged his chin with surprising affection. The red watched the horizon. You know, Kale said quietly, I used to think your kind felt nothing but conquest. The gold tilted its head. The blue lined against his chest. The red's eyes reflected starlight. I was wrong. The words felt like splinters leaving skin. He had built his identity around anger, around the idea that hatred was justified. Now 3 fragile lives contradicted that certainty with every trusting nudge. He rested his back against cold metal and closed his eye briefly. For the first time in years, he did not feel hollow. He felt afraid. Afraid of losing them. Afraid of what protecting them meant. Afraid of who he might become if he continued. Dawn crept slowly across the wasteland. Pale light revealed the full devastation around them. Scars from orbital strikes stretched for kilometers. Blackened craters pocked the landscape. Kale rose stiffly. They were halfway. The ravines lay beyond a final ridge. As he climbed, the gold hatchling suddenly stiffened. It emitted a sharp, urgent trill. The red's head snapped upward. The blue shifted uneasily. Kale heard it seconds later. A low, distant roar. Not thunder. Not wind. Wings. Large. Approaching fast. Kale's blood ran cold. Dragonkins. Adult. He scanned the sky. A massive silhouette cut across the rising sun, wings spanning wide, scales gleaming like burnished bronze. Conquered markings along its flank. Not dominions. Relief warred with instinctive dread. It had found them. The great dragon descended in a controlled spiral, landing atop the ridge ahead in a thunder of displaced air. The ground trembled. Kale instinctively shifted his stance protectively. The red hatchling hissed, not in fear this time but recognition. The gold chirped brightly. The blue tried to lift its injured wing. The massive dragon lowered its head slowly. Its eyes, vast and luminous, settled first on the hatchlings. Then on Kale. Silence stretched between soldier and Leviathan. Kale did not raise his rifle. He did not kneel. He simply stood. The dragon inhaled deeply. Its nostrils flared. It smelled his history. The scent of metal and old battles. The faint residue of dragonkin blood once spilled. Its gaze sharpened. Kale met it steadily. I didn't hurt them, he said quietly. The words were useless across language barriers. But tone carried. The red hatchling wriggled free from his hold and limped forward, chirping insistently. The gold followed eagerly. The blue stumbled after. They reached the massive dragon's foreclaw and pressed against it affectionately. The great dragon's expression changed. The tension in its posture softened. It lowered its head further until its gaze aligned with Kale's at near eye level. Up close, it was breathtaking. Scales layered like living armor, eyes ancient beyond measure. Kale felt small, but he did not look away. The dragon studied him for a long moment. Then slowly it did something unexpected. It lowered its head fully, an unmistakable gesture of respect. Kale's breath caught. The hatchlings turned back toward him, chirping excitedly. The red nudged his metal leg one final time. The gold pressed its forehead briefly against his knee. The blue lined against him carefully. Goodbye. The realization hit with sudden force. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared for it. It still felt like losing something vital. The massive dragon extended a wing protectively around its young. It glanced at Kale once more. Then with a powerful beat of wings, it rose into the sky, hatchlings secured against its body. Wind blasted against Kale as they ascended. He shielded his face instinctively. Within seconds, they were a diminishing silhouette against the brightening morning. Gone. Silence returned to the ridge. Kale stood alone. His arms felt strangely light. His chest felt heavier than ever. He sank to one knee. For years he had carried hatred like armor. It had defined him, protected him, justified him. Now it felt unnecessary. Exhausting. He stared at his metal leg, at the seam along his temple, at hands that had once destroyed. He had saved something instead. Not for strategy, not for redemption, simply because it was right. A strange warmth lingered where the gold hatchling had pressed its head. It did not fade with the wind. Redfall found him hours later. Merrick approached cautiously, scanning the ridge. Ardens, he called. Kale rose slowly. Tracks lead out here, Merrick said, then vanish. Kale nodded toward the sky. Merrick followed his gaze. He saw nothing, but he understood. They gone? Merrick asked quietly. Oh yes. A long pause. Merrick studied him carefully. You protect them. Kale met his friend's eyes. Oh yes. Silence again. Then Merrick exhaled slowly. Town would have killed them. I know. Merrick nodded once. You're different, Kale. Kale looked toward the horizon where wings had vanished. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I am. Weeks passed. Redfall returned to routine. No Dominion retaliation came. No conquered reprimand followed. Instead, one morning, a sleek diplomatic vessel landed just beyond town limits. A Dragonkin envoy emerged, smaller than a warform but still imposing. Merrick accompanied Kale to the meeting. The envoy spoke through a translator device. 3 hatchlings were lost during transport, the mechanical voice relayed. They were found alive. They spoke of a human who shielded them. Kale stiffened. The envoy's golden eyes rested on him. Our kind does not forget debts, the translator continued, nor mercy. A small object was placed at Kale's feet. A scale, crimson, sapphire, and gold fused into a single iridescent fragment. A token, the envoy said, of gratitude, of trust. Kale bent slowly and picked it up. It was warm, alive with faint internal light. He closed his hand around it. The envoy inclined its head, then departed. That night, Kale returned to his cabin. The hearth burned low. The room felt emptier, but not hollow. He placed the fused scale above the mantel where his rifle once hung. He sat beside the fire and listened to the wind beyond the walls. He still remembered the war. He still carried scars. But when he looked at the sky now, he did not see only fire. He saw wings shielding small lives. He saw trust given freely. He saw a choice made in quiet rather than rage. The broken soldier who had once hated aliens had not become something soft. He had become something stronger. He had chosen mercy over memory. And in doing so, he had reclaimed the part of himself the war had tried to burn away. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and unbroken. For the first time in years, Kale Arden did not brace for it to fall.